Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to be invited to the second Asian Forum on Blue Economy for Sustainable Growth of Asean in Vientiane. It is my sincerest intention to attend in person. However, due to the uncompromised agenda, please allow me to share with you my pre-recording remarks on our thoughts and contribution on the blue economy perspective for the resilience of small islands and coastal societies. As you may have known, Seychelles is a small island state with 115 islands spread out in the four-island group in the Indian Ocean, covering an area of 1.4 million square kilometers at the eastern coast of Africa. Being island nations, Seychelles relies on the seas and its nature diversity as the primary source of economic development and growth. Today, Seychelles has embarked to be a developed country with high per capita income, with main revenue stream from tourism, fishery, and international business services. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, despite the economic growth, we remain pristine as niche destination where nature and peoples live in harmony. For this, Seychelles is balancing the need to develop economically and protect its natural endowment. We are finding means of new economy, and on October 2018, the Seychelles government announced the launch of the first world sovereign blue bond. This pioneering model of finance has been used to help finance the island nation's transition to sustainable fisheries and the protection of marine areas. The mobilizing of private finance for this type is a mere achievement that could be replicated in other island nations and beyond. Recently, we have established Blue Institute, an independent institution in Seychelles to focus on the maritime domain as a major engine growth for the small islands and elevate the coastal society's economy. Blue Institute, recognizing the importance of the seas as major economic contributor, intended to embrace more oceanic nations, especially the islands archipelagic, to better face challenges and seize opportunities arising from the current and future ocean global environments as substitution of existing land-based economy. We envisage the promotion of sustainable ocean cooperation with other regional and sub-regional mechanisms to preserve the ocean and complement to the relevant growth of the ocean and coastal nature resources as new blue natural capital. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the blue natural capital assets will provide countries' economy with source of wealth and human well-being for the stability of nations, thus underlining the strategic importance of the preservation, regeneration, and proper management of natural resources. Please allow me to conclude by introducing my colleague, co-founder of Blue Institute, Dr. Ralph Chami, a financial economist with 23 years senior position at IMF, to provide you with analytical approach on the blue natural capital. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Nico, for the introduction. Your Excellencies, it's wonderful to have the chance to address you. And I wish you a very good and fruitful meeting in Laos. Now, my job here is to talk about the role of the blue economy. If we were to start, we would start with the science. The science now tells us that the oceans are the lungs of the planet. We very much used to believe that it was only the trees and land that helped to sequester carbon, but it turns out that the oceans themselves is where the story really lies. In particular, we have the phytoplankton. These are microscopic organisms that float on the ocean, and they capture so much carbon dioxide that is equivalent to 4 Amazon forests per year. Closer to shore, we have seagrass, salt marshes, mangroves, and kelp. They too grab tremendous amount of carbon dioxide and sequester it in the sediments and in the bodies of these plants. But they do a lot more than capturing carbon, because they enhance the fish stocks, they fight off flooding, among other ecosystem services that they provide. Of course, the open ocean itself is a huge carbon sink, but the open ocean is referred to as the orphan because it belongs to nobody and belongs to everybody at the same time. But it's not only flora that captures carbon and sequesters it. Science now tells us that even fauna plays a key role also in helping to capture carbon from the atmosphere and sequester it. And this is a latest work coming out of Yale University with a number of famous scientists basically saying that we have the wildebeest, the sea otters, the gray wolf, the great whales, the elephants, and so forth. They too help to sequester carbon and fight climate change. In particular, here's one example. We have the whales. This is work that we had done in 2019, showing that whales help to capture carbon on their body and sequester it by fertilizing the phytoplankton that I just mentioned before. So the one whale, in terms of carbon sequestration, is equivalent to thousands of trees. On land, they're cousins. These are the forest elephants. They too help to sequester carbon in the forests between 7 and 14%, depending on the concentration of the elephant per square kilometer. So the science is telling us that nature, blue and green, fauna and flora, both help to fight climate change, help to capture carbon and sequester it for a very long time. So science is telling us that nature is incredibly valuable, not only intrinsically valuable, but are valuable to our society and to our economies. Question is, can we take this knowledge in science and translate it into the language of policymakers and language of business? And the answer is yes. How do we do so? Well, we know that there's value from capturing and sequestering carbon. Since the Paris Agreement of 2015, the world has agreed to fight climate change by helping to reduce carbon emissions as well as grab carbon from the atmosphere and sequester it in the soil or in the ocean. As a result, the demand for such service has risen tremendously, pushing the price of carbon dioxide, a ton of carbon dioxide, at least in the compliance market, closer to $100, and in the voluntary market, between $5 and $60 or even $80, depending on certain conditions. So there is value in nature grabbing carbon from the atmosphere and sequestering in the ground. Using this, we can go back into nature and value the services of fauna and flora in terms of carbon sequestration. But where is the market going itself? Well, here's the latest about the market for carbon. As we can see, there's tremendous potential in the value of carbon offset, which, according to the latest work of the investment banks, they believe that's going to top $500 billion by 2050. In terms of the biodiversity market, meaning when we go beyond just grabbing carbon from the atmosphere, but talk about soil quality, water quality, the interaction between fauna and flora, the estimates is that the market is going, by 2050, will be north of $70 billion. And this is really a very low estimate. What has really changed? A lot of things have changed since this work had started. First, we have science-based finance, which allows us to figure out what is the prospective carbon and biodiversity credits going into the future. we have blockchain technology, we have artificial intelligence, we have satellites, we have a number of technological advances that allow us to be able to figure out what is nature up to. Along the way, there's been new regulations that have arrived. They've arrived in Europe through the Nature Restoration Law, which was passed by the EU Parliament and ratified by each of the countries. In the UK, we have the Biodiversity Law. In many other countries, the regulation has now moved up beyond even the carbon to ask each and every company that is domiciled, for example, in Europe, what is its impact on nature? Not only how nature impacts its business, but we call this double materiality. How is the business itself impacting nature? And the objective there is to make sure that the impact of any company in conducting its business, its impact on nature is strictly positive. So when we have the price of carbon and we know how much carbon is being sequestered, be it by mangroves or salt marshes or seagrass, we can go back and value their services. I wanted here to provide you some example of the value of such services. This is work that we had carried on in Florida mangroves, where we estimated that the kilometer square of mangrove, just from planting mangroves, in just carbon sequestration is over $1.6 million. This is work we had done for the UK salt marshes, which is 1 square kilometer of salt marsh in terms of grabbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere would provide income of $1.5 million. Seagrass, this is work that we're doing with the famous marine ecologist, Professor Carlos Duarte, which shows that seagrass worldwide, restoring seagrass worldwide, in terms of just carbon sequestration alone, is worth over $1 trillion. Now imagine when you restore seagrass, you are also enhancing fish stocks. So we can calculate what is the value of the increase in fish due to the healthy seagrass. Also when we have healthy seagrass, we stave off flooding, and we can calculate the value of the seagrass just in terms of flood control. Coral reefs themselves, on net, they do not capture carbon, but they provide so many services to the ocean and to our society. These are some estimates by colleagues putting it north of $36 billion per year, just in ecosystem services by the coral reefs. So what science is telling us is that nature is incredibly valuable to us, nature alive and well. Now we are able to take that knowledge and science and transfer it into a value, a dollar amount that policymakers and businesses can get their heads around it and say, okay, can we build a market around nature that protects nature and at the same time enhance the welfare of the people? This is, before I move on to the market itself, just want to show you that we can use the same technology, the same approach to value the services of fauna. This is work that we had done back in 2019, 2020, 2021, which basically calculates the value of the carbon sequestration service of a single whale, which is over $3 million per whale. And we can do the same for elephants on land, and it turns out that the present value of the lifetime earnings of one elephant just from sequestering carbon is $2.6 million. This is work that we are carrying on right now in the Bahamas, working closely with the Bahamas government. The scientists have discovered that the Bahamas is sitting on at least 30% of the global seagrass mass. That's 93,000 square kilometers of seagrass, and they have the ability to go up by another 40,000 square kilometers, meaning they can replant another 40,000. If the government of the Bahamas chooses to add the 40,000 as a kilometer square of seagrass, that is worth, in terms of just carbon credits alone, over $170 billion for the Bahamas. Now, how do we bring all of this together? I wanted to show you quickly that who is buying the carbon services or the biodiversity services. In terms of the buyers, it could be companies, It could be all kinds. It could be financial companies, technology companies. You can think, for example, Microsoft, Google, Walmart, Kmart, whatever company, airlines that need to offset their carbon footprint, and or they would like to invest in nature itself. So that would be the left-hand side here. These would be the buyers of the carbon credits, if you like, or the biodiversity credits. They would be paying money to pay for the services. It could be mangroves, could be elephants, whales, could be seagrass, whatever it is. What we're doing here is the government itself does not sell the asset. What you're doing here, you keep the ownership of the asset and you're selling the services of the asset, in this case, carbon services. So the money would be spent or would be advanced by, let's say, Microsoft that wants to offset its carbon footprint for the services of mangroves or seagrass or even elephants or even whales. And that money would go to look after, on the right-hand side, to look after, if it is the seagrass, if they're buying the carbon of the seagrass of the Bahamas, for example, that money has to go to look after the seagrass in perpetuity, because only when you plant seagrass and you look after the seagrass, same thing with the mangroves, if you plant mangroves and you manage it, it's only then that it'll be able to sequester carbon. So the money that comes in from the sale of the carbon has to look after the asset itself. Some of that money accrues to the government, and the money also has to go to the local communities in terms of development projects, alleviation of poverty, creating employment, many services that can be purchased by these dollars. In order to do so, we will need to have sensors in place. We need to have the latest technology in order to monitor exactly what's happening to the asset itself, the mangroves and the seagrass and so forth. And we can also use blockchain technology to make sure that the money that is being paid is going to look after the seagrass and go to the government and go to the local communities. And finally, when we build such an economy around the blue, if you like, the blue economy, I want to show you that everybody benefits. From the seller side, if the government is the one that owns the asset, let's say mangroves, and it's selling the carbon services of the mangroves, I want to show you that the government will be able to raise revenue. This revenue is acyclical. It does not depend on tourism. It does not depend on the business cycles. It is acyclical because the carbon is being grabbed out of the atmosphere and sequestered into the ground, and that does not depend on whether there's a recession or anything else, because it depends on our willingness to fight climate change. That income also helps to diversify the economy, and of course, that revenue that is coming in is going to improve the fiscal stance of the government, is going to help in alleviation of the debt services, and is going to improve the sovereign ratings. From the buyer's side, suppose, for example, Microsoft is purchasing the carbon of mangroves. Okay, they are going to use those carbon credits to reduce their carbon footprint. They're going to enhance their ESG score, and they are going to be able to put on their website that they are investing in mangroves. They are enhancing fish stocks, so they are enhancing food security. They're creating resilience in nature. When you create resilience in nature, you stabilize people on their land, and therefore they can claim SDGs 1, 3, 5, 8, 10, 13, 14, 15, all the way up to 17. Who else wins from such an economy? Everybody is a winner, because nature itself is winning, because all that money is only accruing from a living and thriving nature. So the money goes back to look after, as I said before, seagrass and salt marshes and all the natural assets. And of course the communities, the stewards of nature themselves, these are the indigenous people and the local communities. They will be able to receive sustainable income. By having a healthy nature, their health will improve, their well-being will improve, it stabilizes the communities on their land, it helps to alleviate poverty and create meaningful employment opportunities. As you can see, the blue economy is a win-win for everybody. Finally, what I would hope is that we have the chance to provide such a pilot for the ASEAN countries in a country of your choosing if this message appeals with you. And I'd like to thank you for your attention.